All right, if you could please take your seats, we're getting started. This is the IAIS Secretariat Q&A session. We're very pleased to have Jonathan Dixon, the Secretary General of the IAIS, with us, not only for this session, but with us in person. Coming to the U.S. All the way from Basel. So hopefully a sign of things to come where we can not only get back together domestically, but internationally as well. So welcome, Jonathan. Thanks for being here with us. I will turn it over to you.
Thanks very much, Ryan, and good to see everyone. And this is, I think, my first international trip in almost 2 years. So I was very pleased that my first trip should be to the NAIC, and of course our very important member, and to see all of you in person, and important US stakeholders as well. So thank you very much for this opportunity to talk directly about the IAIS and to take your questions. So I know we've got limited time, so I'll try to give a bit of a brief overview. As you can imagine, 2021 has been a very busy year for the IAIS as we continued to monitor developments with COVID-19 and talk about supervisory responses to that, but at the same time maintaining the momentum on our key reforms. So it's been a busy time. Let me try to give a brief overview. And I'll do that in line with what are really the four pillars of our work at the IAIS, kicking off with the first being our risk assessment work. And here, that's really building on the holistic framework that was adopted at the end of 2019 that recognizes that systemic risk in the global insurance sector can be the result not only of the distress or disorderly failure of individual insurers, but also a concentration of exposures to particular activities within the sector. So to undertake our risk assessment work, we have the global monitoring exercise, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and thank you very much to all of the insurers in the room today who are participating in that data collection. It is extremely helpful, and the analysis we get from that, plus the direct engagements that we have with insurers in a qualitative way, really does shape our thinking there. It's the GME gives us a rich data set, so it's data from about 60 global insurers and supervisors as well, representing over 90% of global written premium. So it's a very rich representative sample, and it allows for very much an evidence-based discussion at the global level about what we see as potential systemic risks and coordinated supervisory responses to that. And this year we did actually the first, if you like, regular GME, because last year we had a more targeted GME that was looking at the impact of COVID-19. This year we did the first regular GME, which included looking at potential systemic risk. Not only did we then have a collective discussion at the IAIS level about some individual insurers where the systemic risk scores were quite high, or where there was a big increase in some systemic risk indicators, but we also had a discussion on sector-wide trends, and the three that we focused on were the continued low for long interest rate environment. Of course, that's a fast changing space. Secondly, increased credit risk in the sector, and thirdly, issues around cyber risk. So very, very interesting discussion. I think it really this year demonstrated the usefulness of the holistic framework and the GME. We reported the outcomes to the FSB the Financial Stability Board as well, who welcomed the outcomes of our analysis. So I think that's also positive. We published the results in our Global Insurance Market Report very recently, and if you haven't read that yet, I think it's an interesting read around what insurance supervisors around the world are viewing as priority issues to focus on from a financial stability perspective, as well as a sense of what have been the supervisory responses to these trends around the world as well. And a big thank you to commissioners and the NEIC for the very active engagement in that GME work as well. That's the risk assessment side. Secondly is our standard setting work, and we really did a great deal of effort on the standard setting side up until the end of 2019 when we adopted new ICPs, the common framework for the supervision of internationally active insurance groups, ComFrame, and the holistic framework. So now our standard setting work really is focused on finalizing the one remaining part of ComFrame that we need to finalize, the quantitative side, which is of course the Insurance Capital Standard, or ICS. So their work continues to progress well. So we've had very active engagement, not only with participating insurers this year, the second year of the monitoring period, but also with supervisory colleges as well. So that's been very helpful in giving insights. Of course, we've had COVID-19 as a very real-life stress situation, which has given important information as well. And we continue with the ICS monitoring period timelines, so we're on track, while of course continuing to monitor the impact of COVID-19 on our work. Related to this is of course the very important work that we're doing on the assessment of comparability of the aggregation method, which has been developed by the US and other interested jurisdictions, and whether the aggregation method provides comparable outcomes to the ICS. And there, you know, we continue the intensive work. The overall timelines for the aggregation method comparability assessment are still on track, so we still aim to finalize criteria by the end of next year. But what you will have noted, and as we reported at the annual conference, we had hoped to get out draft criteria for consultation at the end of last year, but that turned out to be probably a little bit overly ambitious in that we started the work 6 months late because of the impact of COVID-19. So we weren't able to fully catch up that 6 months, but we do hope to put those out as soon as possible in the first half of next year. Then thirdly, what is a increasingly important part of our work and what we've been pivoting to is looking at effective supervisory practices in response to accelerating trends in the global insurance sector, many of which have been amplified by COVID-19. So really that is climate change, it's digital transformation, it's cyber risk, it's issues of conduct and culture that we heard about, it's issues of sustainable development and financial inclusion, and a new theme that we've added now, which I just spoke about, which I'm very glad about, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So briefly on each of those, on climate, I mean, really this is a key priority, if not the key priority for the IAIS, and I'm very happy that we've really been a pioneer among standard-setting bodies on this topic, which is not surprising given the importance of this topic for the insurance sector, not only because it's a potential systemic risk, but also because of the important stewardship role of the insurance sector in helping steer the transition to net zero. So we've been doing work for a number of years on this topic, as you know. That continued this year with work on providing guidance to supervisors on how to respond to climate risk to the insurance sector. So we completed our application paper on that. We've also been doing financial stability focused work. So the GMAR special topic looked at the impact of climate risk on insurers' investment exposures, and a very interesting report there that looked at various scenarios, really highlighted the stark difference in the impact of an orderly transition compared to a too little, too late scenario, but it also importantly, I think, flagged some of the challenges with doing this climate risk scenario analysis work. Going forward, I won't touch much on that because I know there was a report back that Ryan did very well at the Climate and Resilience Task Force, but we do have a new climate risk steering group that's taking forward 3 work streams in the very near term, and we can come back to that if there's any questions. And that steering group is led by Daniel Wang from the Monetary Authority of Singapore. Secondly, digital transformation, and really our focus there is on helping supervisors to support innovation because of all the benefits it can bring to consumers for financial inclusion, while at the same time being mindful of the risks to traditional supervisory objectives of policyholder protection and also financial stability issues. We take forward our work there through our FinTech Forum, which we now have a new chair for, a new FinTech champion in the form of Petra Hilkemar, who is the chair of IOPA. So looking forward to Petra bringing new energy on that. We're doing deep dive on 3 topics. So one on governance of artificial intelligence and machine learning, another one on distributed ledger technology and its use in insurance platforms, and lastly on application programming interface, API, and open data, so these open insurance issues. So we'll get reports on that in the first half of next year. We're also doing work on SupTech and helping to, there's a lot of interest from our members on SupTech issues, and we'll be looking at providing some guidance there. Thirdly, on cyber, there's, I think, broad recognition amongst all of our membership that this is really an amplifying risk in the light of the shift to also greater remote working, but also greater digitalization and so on. So that's why this has been identified as a priority topic for next year, and it will be a special topic report of our Global Insurance Market Report, and that will look at some of the potential financial stability implications for the insurance sector of cyber risk, including cyber underwriting, and whether that has the potential either to help mitigate or potentially even amplify some of these potential financial stability risks. So I think that watch the space on that work next year. Financial inclusion and sustainable development, we continue our partnership with the A2II and our important work there. We'll be looking at protection gaps. We'll put out a report on the pandemic risk protection gap early next year, and a supervisory perspective on possible ways to address that. On conduct, we will continue work on key indicators of conduct risk, which I think will be helpful guidance to conduct supervisors. And then lastly, on diversity, equity, inclusion, I just spoke in the previous session, so won't dwell on that, but of course to say it's a very important new focus for us. And then lastly, the last area we focus on increasingly now is on implementation assessment. So we have, as we said, at the end of 2019, agreed a number of reforms. Now it's about assessing the comprehensive and consistent implementation of those standards. And one area that's giving particular attention at the moment is the implementation of the holistic framework supervisory material that was introduced at the end of 2019. And we are doing that at the moment through targeted jurisdictional assessments of 10 jurisdictions, so 10 major global insurance markets around the world, including the US, and those have started already this year and will continue in the first quarter of next year. And we hope to be able to report by the end of the next year on those TGAs, which really have quite intensive verification of supervisory practices in those different jurisdictions, similar to an IMF World Bank style FSAP. So I think we'll learn some very interesting insights from that work as well. So that's, let me stop there in terms of a quick overview. Just to mention, I'm here in the room with you, but also very happy to have a few members of the management team back in Switzerland with us virtually. So I believe on the line we have Manuela Zweimüller, who is the head of implementation, Hannah van Voorden, who is our relatively new head of supervisory practices, and Denita Patamo, who is our deputy head of capital and solvency and has direct oversight of the ICS project. Let me stop there and see if there's any questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Jonathan. So yeah, if we have any questions from regulators, if we have anything from interested parties, feel free to come up to the table or use the mics if you're at the table already. If you're joining us virtually, please use the raised hand function. That way we can call on you. But if we do have folks with questions, as looks like we do, please introduce yourselves at the start, and thanks very much.
Good morning. Don't want to jump in front of any supervisors, but this is Robert Neal with the American Council of Life Insurers, and would just like to thank staff for organizing this. Appreciate it, Ryan, and welcome to your new team members. We appreciate you keeping us up to speed, especially in these days of less in person with all the moving parts. Our members greatly appreciate it. And welcome to Jonathan. Thanks for crossing the pond and taking some time with us. That was a very informative overview, a lot going on. I would just mention a couple things, and I'll try to keep it brief. Susan Neely, the ACLI CEO, is the Vice President of the Global Federation of Insurance Associations. We have engaged, or the GIFIA has engaged, with several of my other trade association colleagues who are also GIFIA members to look at DEI in the various GIFIA jurisdictions, and we appreciate Jonathan recognizing the ongoing dialogue that the GIFIA Exco has with the IAIS. I know Commissioner Altmaier and Ryan were actively involved in the two meetings that took place this year at the Global Federation with the IAIS leadership and with several members of the IAIS Executive Committee. So those are greatly appreciated. We know there a lot of time and work goes into organizing those. We will be reporting to the IAIS on the GIFIA survey of its members early in the year, and look forward to working with you to kind of leverage some of the work. I think that's something that we can work collaboratively on. ACLI has been very engaged with the NAIC on its diversity, equity, inclusion work. So thank you for that, and look forward to further work. Would also just mention that the Indonesian Insurance Association actually joined GIFIA recently, and they will be the presidency of the G20 next year. And as you know, the NAIC, the IAIS, several of our member company CEOs have participated in the G20 Insurance Summit that is put together by the G20 countries each year. So we hope that that will take place this year, and look forward to working with you guys on that as well. With respect to bilateral engagement, we look forward to continuing to engage with you on that. That's more of an NAIC thing that I know Maurice will be taking on, so look forward to working with you on that. We did have a question on the climate work, and heard Ryan's remarks yesterday and various commissioners' remarks. We appreciate all the work that's going on domestically and at the IAIS, and are glad to see the U.S. engaged with the IAIS steering committee. With respect to the three work streams, the gap analysis and the GME in particular. Would just be curious if you have any idea, and this may take some time to flesh out, but how you'll be prioritizing that work, what will be looked at first. I would assume the gap analysis. We have a new task force of our members that's looking at the work at the NAIC and at the IAIS, and a lot of work in other parts here domestically, both with Treasury and with the SEC. There's just a lot going on. So we're trying to prioritize and just understand the work of the IAIS and how to feed into that. And on that same note, with respect to the global monitoring exercise, similarly would suggest, active engagement with stakeholders as you work with the firm, so that we understand how the implications for climate risk there too. So with that said, those are my questions and comments, and appreciate your time.
Well, thanks very much, Robert. I think let's test the technology now and see whether Hannah is able to join us and speak to that question. I mean, the work is, as you say, at a relatively early stage, but perhaps Hannah can give a little bit of a sense of how it might be progressing and what might be the priorities in terms of the first steps and how we'll take it forward. So fingers crossed.
Hi, Jonathan. Can you hear me?
That's great.
Okay, perfect. I'm not sure if you can also see me, but okay, great. So thanks, Robert, for your question and your interest in the work of the IAIS on climate risk. So as Jonathan also already mentioned, we just set up this new climate risk steering group really just a couple of months ago, and they are working on 3 different work streams. And it's not necessarily the case that I would say that one of the 3 work streams is a bigger priority than the other. So it's really being pursued in parallel. But at the same time, we do acknowledge that we will have to kind of phase our work. So what we agreed within the IAIS is that now in the first couple of months of the climate risk steering group, we are doing exploratory work on all of the 3 work streams to see where the focus should lie in 2022. So let me take them one by one. So the first one is a gap analysis of our standards, so our insurance core principles. And we are going to discuss later in February for each of the different standards, so all the 24 core principles, how climate risk is already addressed, why it is relevant, and what further work might be needed. For instance, in terms of developing a second application paper. So we did an application paper, of course, this year, which focused more around corporate governance, ERM, the role of the supervisor, disclosures, ORSA. But there might be opportunity to go deeper in one of those areas, or also to develop an application paper on other areas which weren't covered in the paper we discussed, we published earlier this year. So that's one possible priority area. The other one is around scenario analysis. And there, Robert, you also mentioned, the work of the NGFS and others. So also there, we're first going to see with our members where the IAIS can really help in progress supervisors' work on climate scenario analysis, and really trying to build on what is already done by supervisors across the globe, but also by the NGFS and others. And there we are planning to do some engagements through roundtables in Q2 next year. So that's probably relevant for you to note. On integrating climate risk into our TME, as you may know, the work that we did last year or this year, on which culminated in the publication of the GMOR special topic, was based on an ad hoc data collection amongst our members. And right now we're looking at how we can further refine that for next year. For instance, by looking not only at assets, but also at underwriting. And also we're exploring ways to see how we can further improve the data collection and data consistency there. And to the extent that this will include any data collections for individual insurers, we also plan to engage with you directly over the course of the next couple of months. So that's still, that's definitely something that we will do because it's also for us, it's helpful to know what type of data is available, what is the type of definitions that are used by insurers, and what are the data gaps and challenges that you are encountering. So that's definitely something where we are keen to engage on as well. So I hope this helps, and otherwise happy to respond to any follow-up question.
Thanks very much, Hannah. And Robert, you mentioned the active engagement of the NEIC in this work, and I also want to acknowledge and thank Ryan Workman, who's chairing the work stream on the climate risk gap analysis as well. So thanks, Ryan.
Thanks for that.
Thanks, Dave.
Good morning. I think it's still morning. And thank you for the session, both that we had with the International Committee and this one. And I wanted to follow up on the concept of culture. Both APCIA and the Global Federation of Insurance Associations, for which I chair the market conduct and corporate governance working groups, submitted some extensive comments where we certainly agreed that culture is important. We also wanted to underscore a key line in the paper that states that there's no right or good, I think, singular culture, and it calls into mind the importance of flexibility and application of that. As follow-up work, we're very interested in seeing, and this is a general request, but also one based on the follow-up work of the culture paper, that we have more stakeholder engagement than the formal sort of consultation process, and particularly when a committee or IAIS in general embark on a new area or there's a new initiative within an established area, that our request would be that there could be some sort of dialogue rather than waiting for the paper to be written and the formal consultation process. So those were a couple comments about that. On climate risk, I wanted to call attention that GIFIA sponsored a program on insurance and climate risk at COP26, and I would commend that session to everyone's attention, as well as the position papers that were put out by the Global Federation of Insurance Associations. And the importance of that is that it represents obviously a global insurance presence, but also represents companies of all shapes and sizes and business models. So the issue of flexibility in applying any of these standards is something very important, and I know is underscored in the IAIS concept of proportionality. And then finally, on the ICS, is there anything more you can tell us about the thinking or the process going forward on the ICS? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dave, and thanks also very much for your ongoing very active engagement with the IAIS work. On the first point on culture, I think as mentioned, what we are going to focus on within this broad theme of culture going forward are the diversity, equity, inclusion aspects of culture. And I think, I think you raise a valid comment, and because this is a new theme within our IAIS work, I think that's why when we what we have set out is that as we embark on this exploratory work, there will be very close engagement, and I hope collaboration with our stakeholders in industry associations. So I know Hannah who I think might have had to drop off, but Hannah is also taking forward this work on DE&I. We have I think a call, I was going to say coming up, but I think it happened yesterday, with our new DE&I champion, who is Helen Rowell, who is a vice chair of the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority, who I think will be a fantastic champion for this work. And they've been, it's been about plotting the work plan, the work program for this, but I know it will include a good deal of engagement early on with our industry stakeholders on this topic, because it's something that we very much need to tackle jointly. Secondly, on the climate side, thanks. I know the climate risk work streams will definitely be looking at the JAFIA work there, and this is important. I'm glad you raised it, because certainly I think monitoring the risks to the insurance sector is very important, but it's not enough. It's also definitely we need to see concrete actions from public and private sectors alike on climate change mitigation and adaptation. And we are going to be looking at what we can do from the supervisor's side as a global community to support that. There's important work, for instance, done by the IDF and others, and we need to think about how can supervisors potentially play a role in supporting that stewardship role of the sector. At the very least, making sure there's no unintended barriers to that work progressing. But it's also very encouraging to see the good progress made by the many industry-led initiatives, such as the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero and the Net Zero Insurance Alliance, and we're very keen to think about how, as a global community of insurance supervisors, we best engage with firms on those voluntary commitments that they've made and their progress with those voluntary commitments. So I think it's something we will probably look to collectively think about at the IAIS level as well. On the ICS, I think this is a good opportunity to bring in the Canadian member of the management team, Denita Patamore, who I said is Deputy Head of Capital and Solvency, who I know was very much enjoying the Bryan Adams music as she was waiting to join. So, Denita, over to you.
Thanks very much, Jonathan, and I hope that you can hear me well. Good evening from Basel. It's nice to see people meeting together in person again. It's certainly been a long time since we've been able to do that, and we're looking forward to maybe a change in 2022 when we can do that again. On the ICS, I'll give a quick update of where we are and what we'll be doing over the next couple of years. We're at the stage of the second year of the monitoring period, where a lot of the analysis of the data has been done and information has been shared with group-wide supervisors so that there can be the supervisory college discussions of the ICS. And that's an important input and feedback that we receive in the monitoring period as to the performance of the ICS and whether it is capturing all of the risks that it's intended, if it's working in the jurisdictions that are going to, that are participating in the monitoring period. So we are expecting to have input from the supervisory colleges in the first half of January 2022. That will help us inform what we'll be collecting as part of the 2022 monitoring period and data collection for the ICS. The next big milestone for the ICS will be in mid-2023 when we have the consultation on ICS as a prescribed capital requirement. At the same time in 2023, we'll be starting the economic impact assessment that is part of the work plan and timeline for the ICS, where we'll be looking at the ICS and how it's performing, what the economic impact is on the ICS. Are there any particular products that perhaps are not performing as well under the ICS as we would expect? We're particularly interested in looking at long-term products, as we know that there's been some concerns raised by volunteer groups in North America that long-term products are adversely affected, so we are actively looking at that. The comparability assessment is running in parallel with the work on the ICS, so the timelines are very similar. The comparability assessment will begin around the same time as the ICS consultation, so that's scheduled for Q3 of 2023. And the assessment would end in early 2024 with the planned, and if we move further into 2024, that's the endpoint, so the adoption of the ICS as a prescribed capital requirement, and then the decision on the assessment of whether the aggregation method provides comparable outcomes to the ICS. So it will certainly be a busy couple of years as we progress this work towards the end date in late 2024.
Great. Thanks very much, Danita. Great. I hope that covers the questions. And Dave, that's okay? And if so, then we'll go to Peter.
Thank you, and welcome back to the United States, Jonathan. My name is Peter Kotzenberger. I am a professor at the University of Connecticut School of Law, focus on insurance law, and an NAIC consumer representative here. In returning to the earlier work that the IAIS did, with encouragement both, I think, from the NAIC and the consumer representatives, I wonder if when you can prioritize or at least work on additional consumer stakeholder engagement. I very much appreciate, we appreciate colleagues, Bernie Birnbaum and others, appreciate the IAIS's willingness to include several of us in its work over the years, as well as participation on panels. And which would, of course, would not happen without NAIC support, which we also are grateful for. But no one pretends, and I don't think anyone pretends in the room or certainly online, that several of us can represent or even pretend to represent consumer interests outside, even perhaps within the United States, but certainly outside. And the participation of additional consumer stakeholders should also be easier, or at least in terms of their work within the IAIS, is one of the many things we've learned from COVID is the ability not to replace face-to-face meetings, but to supplement them and to move some of the current face-to-face to online. That removes one of the primary barriers that has always existed to consumer participation, which is the cost of attendance. So now I think there's even a greater opportunity and need for consumer participation and the ability to do so. I think every one of those work streams that you've discussed earlier today, which of course are important, the priorities, particularly DEI, with climate change and data and transition and transformation, all of them will be improved by additional input, and by input from the consumers who are ultimately the focus of supervisory review. So I would, several of us would be happy to help with that, although I think the primary resource you have, of course, are your members who can identify groups within their jurisdictions that would be able to participate, particularly virtually. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Peter. And I think you raise a very important point. I should have mentioned, I think we also have Joe Perry with us virtually, I hope. But Joe is our senior advisor on stakeholder engagement issues. So many of you knew Marika Brady, and Joe's took over from Marika a year or two ago. And I'm happy to say, to share that this issue of how do we effectively increase our engagement with consumer representatives is one of the issues on Joe's deliverable list for next year. So this is prioritized.
Thank you.
I see we do have Joe. So Joe, you might want to confirm that and any initial thoughts.
Thanks, that's really helpful, and hopefully you can hear me okay. Yes, as to reiterate Jonathan's point, we're very keen to engage. I think we also know that consumer bodies have limited resources, so we're keen to use your resources in a way that's kind of effective and efficient. So we're kind of very open to suggestions in terms of how we take that engagement forward. So obviously feel free to reach out to us directly, and we can take these discussions forward. Thank you.
Thank you, we will. Thank you very much.
And I think next is Morag. Morag, very nice to see you again.
Thank you. I hope we have time for one more question. I know you're at the end here, so Ryan, if you have to stop me. I just want to go back to part of the discussion, and maybe Danita wants to take this. Here at the meeting in the accounting area, there was an announcement made that the one ICP that hasn't been redone, ICP 14 on valuation, one of the very first to be written, is up for review. And that always was contemplated that as ICS moved forward, it would be done. But I'm wondering if you can give us a little information about the timing, the process, what committee might be doing that, and when you think we'll start to see some discussions on it.
Right, over to Danita.
Okay, thanks, Marek. A very timely question, because ICP 14, the drafting group that is looking at that actually started meeting in the last couple of weeks. So we've formed a drafting group. It's a subset of members from the Capital Solvency and Field Testing Working Group, as well as the Accounting and Auditing Working Group. So those two groups are going to take it together, work on it together. The idea is that we will consult on revisions to ICP 14 at the same time that we consult on the ICS. So that would be in mid-2023. So the work has started. As you mentioned, it is one of the ICPs that was delayed while we were working on getting the ICS ready for the monitoring period. But now the work has begun on ICP 14 and will begin very shortly on ICP 17 as well, which was the other ICP that was held back while we continued development of the ICS.
Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Morag. And not sure if we have any other questions.
All right, well, if there are no further questions, thanks everybody for participating. Jonathan, thanks again for making the trek across an ocean and a continent to be here with us for the past couple days. Thanks to the Secretariat staff for joining us virtually. And yeah, obviously a lot going on at the IAIS. We've got the NAIC and states actively contributing to pretty much all the work streams that were covered today. So a lot to do, a lot accomplished in the last year, and a lot more to do in the next year. So thanks everybody for joining us for the session, and that will conclude it. Thank you very much.